A tale of two ancient churches. In a world where the Catholic Church is often viewed as a single, towering monolith, unchanging, uniform, and universally practiced, the reality is far more intricate and far more compelling. Beneath the surface of what many perceive as one church lies a rich, centuries-old tapestry woven from diverse cultures, languages, and sacred rituals. At the heart of this divine mosaic are two deeply rooted traditions, Roman Catholicism and Eastern Catholicism. Though united in doctrine and communion with the Pope, they diverge in profound ways that reflect their unique histories, spiritual philosophies, and liturgical lives. These aren't mere stylistic differences, they speak to distinct theological worldviews, ecclesial structures, and sacred rhythms. As debates over unity, identity, and authenticity stir once more within global Christianity, it's time to lift the veil. What separates these two ancient expressions of the same Catholic faith? And how do their differences enrich the whole? This is not just a list. This is a journey, a revealing look into the top 10 differences between Roman Catholicism and Eastern Catholicism. A journey that will take you across continents, centuries, and deep into the soul of the universal church. Prepare to witness the beauty of divergence, held together by a shared belief in one Lord, one faith, one baptism. 1. The liturgical rites, Latin versus Byzantine and beyond. At the center of Catholic worship lies the liturgy, the public and communal prayer of the Church. While many outside observers assume there's a single Catholic way of celebrating Mass, the reality is dramatically more diverse and spiritually profound. In the Roman Catholic Church, the primary liturgical tradition is the Latin Rite, also known as the Roman Rite. Rooted in the ancient city of Rome, this rite has evolved over centuries and now centers around the Roman Missal, particularly as reformed after the Second Vatican Council. The Roman Rite is characterized by a sense of order, clarity, and theological precision. Its structure is concise, with defined rubrics, a linear flow, and clear language. Music ranges from Gregorian chant to modern hymns, and the altar typically stands plainly visible at the front of the sanctuary, often accompanied by statuary and subdued iconography. Even the choice of unleavened bread reflects an emphasis on the sacrificial nature of Christ's passion, linking directly to the Jewish Passover. In contrast, the Eastern Catholic churches follow a spectrum of ancient liturgical rites, each with their own distinctive language, culture, and rhythm of worship. These include the Byzantine, Alexandrian, Coptic and Ethiopian, Armenian, East Syrian, Chaldean, and West Syrian, Maronite and Syriac rites. While diverse, they all share certain characteristics that set them apart from the Latin tradition. The most widespread among them is the Byzantine Rite, which forms the core of worship in Ukrainian, Melkite, Ruthenian, and other Eastern Catholic churches. Here, liturgy is not simply a prayer service, it is a divine drama, a mystical participation in the heavenly liturgy. The Eastern Divine Liturgy, such as that of St. John Chrysostom or St. Basil the Great, is marked by incense, iconography, chant, processions, elaborate vestments, and a deeply symbolic use of space. The iconostasis, a wall of icons separating the altar from the congregation, reflects the mystery of heaven veiled yet revealed. The language used is often ancient and poetic, reinforcing the sense that this is not a mundane gathering but an eternal act of praise in union with the angels and saints. Importantly, these differences are not just aesthetic or cultural, they're theological. The Roman Rite, with its streamlined structure and emphasis on Christ's sacrificial death, speaks to the juridical and incarnational dimensions of salvation. The Eastern rites, however, emphasize deification, theosis, the process of becoming like God through participation in his divine nature. In Eastern liturgies, the faithful don't just remember Christ, they enter mystically into his resurrection, celebrating not only the cross but the cosmic renewal of creation. Moreover, this liturgical diversity within Catholicism is not accidental or peripheral, it is intentional and revered. The Second Vatican Council, in Orientalium Ecclesiarum, affirmed the dignity and independence of the Eastern Catholic liturgical traditions, calling them equal in honor to the Latin Rite and necessary for the fullness of the Church's witness. Pope John Paul II famously referred to the Catholic Church as breathing with two lungs, East and West. This difference in liturgical rite, therefore, is foundational. It not only shapes the external expressions of worship but also molds the interior spiritual life of the faithful. It forms saints, sustains communities, and reveals the glorious tapestry of Catholic unity in legitimate diversity. Roman Catholicism and Eastern Catholicism, though united under one faith and one pope, worship the same God in harmonies that reflect the breadth and depth of the Church's universal mission. 2. Theological language and emphasis. Though united in dogma, Roman Catholicism and Eastern Catholicism articulate their shared faith through very different theological lenses. These differences aren't contradictions, but they reflect centuries of distinct cultural, linguistic, and spiritual development. At the heart of this divergence lies the way each tradition expresses the mysteries of God. In the Roman Catholic tradition, theology is often framed through the lens of scholasticism, a method of reasoning rooted in classical philosophy, particularly the works of St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Augustine. This approach emphasizes clarity, logic, and definition. It seeks to explain divine mysteries through rational argumentation and precise language. Concepts like justification, original sin, sanctifying grace, and transubstantiation are articulated in legal, moral, and metaphysical categories, giving the Roman tradition a powerful tool for doctrinal precision and systematic theology. It's a tradition well suited to formulating dogmas, defending them, and teaching them universally. By contrast, Eastern Catholic theology, drawing from the same foundational truths, is rooted in a mystical and apophatic, or a negative, tradition. Rather than defining God in exact terms, the East often emphasizes what cannot be said, the ineffability of the divine. Influenced deeply by the Cappadocian Fathers, St. Basil the Great, St. Gregory of Nazianzus, and St. Gregory of Nyssa, and St. Gregory Palamas, the Eastern tradition speaks of theology as the experience of God, not just knowledge about Him. God is mystery, not to be dissected but entered into through prayer, liturgy, and spiritual transformation. This fundamental divergence affects the emphasis of salvation theology. In the Roman West, the dominant framework is justification, how sinful humanity is made right with God through the merits of Christ, applied through grace, faith, and the sacraments. Salvation is often viewed in terms of legal restoration and sanctification. The cross is central as the instrument of satisfaction for sin, aligning with a judicial understanding of redemption. The East, however, places profound emphasis on theosis, or deification, the process by which human beings are transformed by divine grace into the likeness of God. Here, salvation is less a legal act and more a healing and elevation of the human nature, restoring the image of God within. As the early Eastern Fathers often stated, God became man so that man might become God. This transformation is not merely moral but ontological, it changes what we are, not just what we do. Even their symbols reflect these theological languages. Where Roman theology often invokes the courtroom, judge, guilt, punishment, pardon, Eastern theology sees the hospital, illness, healing, and transfiguration. Grace in the West is a gift given, while in the East, it's the uncreated energies of God shared with humanity. Moreover, the role of mystery in Eastern theology is essential. Doctrines such as the Trinity or the Eucharist are approached not to be dissected and solved but to be reverently encountered. The Eastern mind prefers the language of paradox, symbol, and beauty, which is why icons, hymns, and liturgical poetry are not decorations but theological statements. None of this implies contradiction between East and West. The Catholic Church affirms the validity and beauty of both. Rather, these differences show how cultural and philosophical backgrounds shape theological expression. Latin Christianity was shaped by Roman legalism and the Greco-Roman rational tradition. Eastern Christianity arose in a world steeped in Hellenistic philosophy, Semitic mysticism, and Byzantine spirituality. Roman Catholicism speaks with the voice of law, order, and definition, while Eastern Catholicism whispers the language of mystery, beauty, and transformation. Both proclaim the same Christ. But they sing His truth in two magnificent harmonies, inviting the faithful to understand, experience, and embody the divine life from complementary and sacredly distinct perspectives. 3. Papal authority, supreme versus synodal unity. One of the most sensitive and historically consequential differences between Roman Catholicism and Eastern Catholicism lies in their respective approaches to papal authority. While both traditions are in full communion with the Pope and accept his role as the successor of St. Peter, the degree, style, and structure of that authority have been interpreted and exercised in profoundly different ways. In the Roman Catholic Church, the Pope is recognized not only as the spiritual head of the global Church but also as possessing supreme, full, immediate, and universal jurisdiction over every local church, bishop, and believer. This doctrine was solemnly defined at the First Vatican Council in 1870, reinforcing that the Pope's authority is not simply honorary or symbolic, it is juridical and practical. He can intervene directly in any diocese, appoint or remove bishops, and issue teachings that are binding on all Catholics. This centralized model ensures global consistency and doctrinal unity, but it has also given rise to what some theologians refer to as Roman centralism, where decisions affecting local churches are often made in the Vatican. In contrast, Eastern Catholic churches, while fully acknowledging the Pope's primacy of honor and authority, operate under a different ecclesial model, one deeply shaped by the synodal traditions of the Christian East. Governance in these churches is often collegial and decentralized, rooted in synods of bishops who lead their own particular churches. These synods elect their own patriarchs or major archbishops, depending on the rite, govern internal liturgical and pastoral affairs, and maintain distinct canon laws, customs, and theological emphases. The Pope confirms these leaders and maintains ultimate doctrinal oversight, but does not routinely intervene in day-to-day governance unless necessary. This difference reflects ancient ecclesiological principles. In the early Church, authority was often exercised in regional synods, where bishops gathered to discern the will of the Holy Spirit together. The East retained this model even as the West gradually moved toward greater papal centrality. The tension between papal supremacy and synodal collegiality was a major factor in the Great Schism of 1054, which split the Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches. For the Orthodox, the idea of one bishop having supreme authority over the entire church was, and remains, a serious point of contention. Eastern Catholics, many of whom entered into communion with Rome during the Unions of Brest, 1596, Uzhhorod, 1646, and other similar agreements, retained their orthodox ecclesial structures while accepting papal primacy. This has created a unique ecclesial identity, Eastern in spirituality, liturgy, and governance, yet Catholic in communion. However, this unity is not without tensions. At times, Eastern Catholics have felt pressure to Latinize, to conform more closely to Roman customs and hierarchical norms. Conversely, some Latin Catholics have struggled to understand or accept the Eastern emphasis on local autonomy and synodal governance. Fortunately, the Second Vatican Council, particularly in Orientalium Ecclesiarum, affirmed the equal dignity of Eastern Catholic churches and called for their full freedom to govern according to their own traditions. Today, this difference is not a division but a dynamic tension, a tension that enriches the Catholic Church's mission. Pope Francis has often emphasized the importance of synodality, drawing inspiration from Eastern Catholic and Orthodox models of ecclesial life. His call for a more synodal church is, in many ways, a rediscovery of the Eastern Catholic witness to collaborative and spirit-led governance. While the Pope remains the universal shepherd, Eastern Catholics reveal a vision of the Church that is less hierarchical and more conciliar, echoing the ancient practice of bishops leading together under the guidance of the Holy Spirit. This supreme versus synodal dynamic is not a contradiction, but a complementary model of unity in diversity, rooted in apostolic tradition and unfolding in today's unfolding search for authentic Catholic communion. For married clergy, celibacy versus optional celibacy. One of the most visible and often misunderstood distinctions between Roman Catholicism and Eastern Catholicism concerns the discipline of clerical celibacy. While most Roman Catholics around the world are accustomed to seeing only celibate, unmarried priests, many are surprised to learn that Eastern Catholic priests can be, and often are, married men, a practice with deep roots in Christian antiquity. In the Roman Catholic Church, celibacy is a universal norm for diocesan priests in the Latin Rite, mandated as a discipline rather than a doctrine. This means it is a church-imposed rule, not an unchangeable theological truth. Celibacy is regarded as a powerful spiritual witness, reflecting the undivided devotion of a priest to God and his flock, and mirroring the life of Christ himself. It became mandatory in the Latin Church through a series of reforms in the first and second millennia, most decisively during the Second Lateran Council, 1139, and the Council of Trent, 1545 to 1563. Today, this rule is enforced strictly, with exceptions granted only in rare circumstances, such as for married former Protestant ministers who convert and are ordained Catholic priests. In the Eastern Catholic churches, however, the tradition is different. Following the ancient discipline of the early Church and Eastern Orthodoxy, married men may be ordained to the priesthood, though they must be married before ordination. Once ordained, if the priest becomes widowed, he cannot remarry. Bishops, on the other hand, are chosen from the ranks of celibate monks or unmarried clergy, preserving a universal standard of episcopal celibacy across East and West. This Eastern tradition is not seen as a compromise or a lowering of the priestly ideal. Rather, it stems from a holistic view of pastoral ministry, where the presence of a priest's wife and family is often considered a strength, especially in parish life. The Apostle Peter, whom Catholics honor as the first pope, was married, compare to Mark 1 verse 30. Many of the Church Fathers, Eastern and Western, affirmed the legitimacy of married clergy, and St. Paul's pastoral letters suggest this was a common practice in the apostolic era. The presence of married clergy in Eastern Catholicism is also a powerful sign of diversity within unity. Though in communion with the same pope, these churches uphold their distinctive heritage and pastoral customs. The Second Vatican Council's Orientalium Ecclesiarum called for the full preservation and respect of Eastern disciplines, explicitly affirming the right of these churches to maintain their tradition of married clergy. Despite this, historical pressures, especially from Latin hierarchies in diaspora communities, sometimes led to Latinization efforts, discouraging married clergy in places like North America. These tensions caused great pain and even schism. However, in recent decades, there has been a renewed commitment to respecting Eastern disciplines, and Rome now officially recognizes the right of Eastern Catholic churches to ordain married men anywhere in the world. The difference in clerical celibacy between Roman and Eastern Catholicism is not a theological rift but a disciplinary distinction, reflecting the diverse pastoral wisdom of the universal Church. Both traditions, celibate and married, offer powerful, complementary witnesses to the love of Christ and the demands of priestly service. 5. Use of icons versus statues. In the sacred spaces of Catholic worship, what one sees often reveals what one believes. And perhaps no visual difference is more striking between Roman Catholicism and Eastern Catholicism than the use of religious imagery, statues versus icons. This contrast is not merely about aesthetics or art forms, it reflects two deeply rooted theological worldviews that express how the divine is encountered through matter. In Roman Catholic churches, you will commonly find statues, three-dimensional representations of Christ, the Virgin Mary, angels, and the saints. These statues are often highly detailed, emotional, and lifelike, inviting the faithful to contemplate holy figures as if they stood physically present. The Western artistic tradition developed over centuries, from the Romanesque and Gothic to the Renaissance and Baroque periods, emphasizing the humanity of Christ and the saints. Statues in Catholicism are not worshipped but venerated, honored as reminders of the heavenly Church and the communion of saints. In contrast, Eastern Catholic churches place central emphasis on icons, sacred, two-dimensional images painted on wood, often using egg tempera and gold leaf. Icons are not simply religious artwork, they are theological statements, steeped in symbolism and liturgical function. To the Eastern mind, an icon is a window into heaven, a mystical threshold through which the faithful are drawn into the presence of the holy. Icons do not aim to mimic physical realism. Instead, they depict the transfigured state of saints in glory, using reverse perspective, symbolic colors, and formalized gestures to convey the eternal rather than the temporal. This visual divergence stems from different approaches to incarnation and sacramentality. The Roman Church emphasizes realism and historical incarnation. God entered time and space, so we can depict that sacred history with physical realism. The Eastern tradition, influenced by early Church Fathers and the decisions of the Seventh Ecumenical Council, Second Council of Nicaea, 787 AD, sees icons not as mere representations, but as participatory theology. To gaze at an icon in prayer is not just to remember a saint or event, but to commune with the reality it depicts. Moreover, icons are often integrated into the structure of Eastern liturgy itself. The iconostasis, a wall of icons separating the sanctuary from the nave, is not a barrier but a veil, emphasizing the mystery of the heavenly liturgy being celebrated beyond. Each icon, from Christ Pantocrator to the Theotokos, Mother of God, serves as a catechetical tool and spiritual companion in the life of the Church. Even posture towards sacred images differs. In the East, the faithful do not simply look at icons, they bow, kiss, and incense them, engaging all senses in a ritual dialogue with the divine. In the West, similar acts of veneration occur with statues, though often with a different emotional and artistic tone. The use of statues in the West and icons in the East reflects two profound traditions of visual theology, both valid, both rich, but distinct in their emphasis. While statues draw attention to the incarnation in human form, icons point to the transfiguration of the human into divine glory. Together, they reveal how matter can be a vessel of the sacred, and how art becomes theology in color, wood, and form. 6. Language of worship, Latin versus vernacular and ancient tongues. Language is not just a means of communication, it is a carrier of identity, memory, and spiritual legacy. In the Catholic world, the language of worship has long been a defining feature of how the faithful relate to God, Scripture, and sacred tradition. This is especially true when comparing Roman Catholicism and Eastern Catholicism, where the liturgical languages employed offer profound insight into each tradition's historical path and theological priorities. In the Roman Catholic Church, Latin held sway for centuries as the exclusive language of the liturgy. From the early Middle Ages until the reforms of the Second Vatican Council, 1962 to 1965, the Latin Rite Mass was celebrated in Latin across the globe, uniting the Roman Church in a universal liturgical tongue, regardless of region or culture. Latin, as a dead language, provided a sense of sacred permanence. Its unchanging nature symbolized the unchangeable truths of the faith. But this also created a barrier for many faithful who could not understand the language being spoken during the most intimate moments of worship. After Vatican II, the Church made a pivotal shift. The vernacular, local languages like English, Spanish, French, Swahili, and others, was permitted and even encouraged in the Mass and sacraments. This was meant to enhance participation, comprehension, and engagement, making the mysteries of the Mass more accessible. Yet Latin still holds a privileged place in Roman Catholic liturgy. The Church still considers it the official liturgical language of the Roman Rite, and Latin Masses, especially the traditional Latin Mass or Tridentine Mass, are still celebrated and cherished by many communities worldwide. In contrast, Eastern Catholic churches have always maintained a more diverse and ancient linguistic tradition. They celebrate their liturgies in languages that often predate Latin's liturgical dominance. These include Koine Greek, used by Melkite and Greek Catholic churches. Church Slavonic, in Ukrainian and Ruthenian churches. Syriac, used in the Maronite and Chaldean rites. Coptic, used by Coptic Catholics. Ge'ez, in the Ethiopian Catholic Church. Arabic, Armenian, and other ancient tongues. These languages are not chosen simply for practical use, they are sacramental vessels, containing centuries of prayer, theological formulation, and sacred poetry. They connect the worshipper with the early church and provide a cultural continuity that is especially vital for communities that have endured persecution or diaspora. Moreover, in many Eastern Catholic traditions, the liturgical language remains fixed, even if the vernacular is spoken in the wider community. This practice fosters a sense of sacred space and time during the divine liturgy, where language itself becomes a bridge to the heavenly liturgy. The preservation of ancient languages in the Eastern tradition does more than honor the past, it serves as a living catechesis. Each phrase, hymn, and response is steeped in theology and tradition, uniting worshippers not only across space but across centuries. The Roman Catholic embrace of vernacular languages post-Vatican II marks a pastoral shift toward inclusion and comprehension, while the Eastern Catholic fidelity to ancient tongues preserves the mystique, beauty, and theological integrity of centuries-old liturgical traditions. Both approaches underscore the Church's mission to proclaim timeless truths in every tongue, to every heart. 7. Language of worship, Latin versus vernacular and ancient tongues. Language in the Church is never neutral, it is the medium of divine encounter, of sacred tradition, of worship passed down through centuries. One of the most fascinating contrasts between Roman Catholicism and Eastern Catholicism is found in the liturgical languages each tradition uses in the divine liturgy or Mass. This difference speaks volumes about theology, culture, and how each church connects with its faithful and with its past. For centuries, the Roman Catholic Church upheld Latin as the universal language of worship. It wasn't just the administrative tongue of the Western Church, it was the sacred idiom of the Mass, the sacraments, and the Roman liturgical tradition. Latin unified believers across continents and centuries, forming a single linguistic thread from medieval monasteries to cathedrals in South America and mission churches in Africa. Yet, this unity came at a cost. As the Church expanded into new territories, many laypeople could no longer understand the language of their worship. While Latin carried immense theological precision and a sense of timelessness, it also created a barrier between the clergy and the laity. Worship became a mystery not only in content, but in comprehension. Recognizing this pastoral gap, the Second Vatican Council, 1962–1965, issued sweeping reforms. One of the most impactful was the promotion of the vernacular in the liturgy. This meant that Mass could be celebrated in the local language, English, French, Spanish, Tagalog, Zulu, whatever language the faithful actually spoke and understood. The goal was greater participation, deeper understanding, and a more immediate encounter with the sacred mysteries. Latin, however, was never abolished. It remains the official language of the Roman Rite, and the traditional Latin Mass continues to be celebrated, particularly among Catholics drawn to its solemnity and historic continuity. In contrast, Eastern Catholic churches never abandoned their ancient liturgical languages, many of which are older than Latin's ecclesiastical use. These include Koine Greek in Greek Catholic and Melkite churches, Church Slavonic in Ruthenian and Ukrainian traditions, Syriac in Maronite and Chaldean rites, Coptic in the Coptic Catholic Church, Arabic, Aramaic, Ge'ez, and others in their respective rites. These languages are more than linguistic relics. They carry the theological insights, mystical hymnography, and scriptural cadences of the early Church. For many Eastern Catholics, using these tongues in the divine liturgy is a sacramental act, a way of stepping into the eternal liturgy of heaven, echoing the voices of the apostles and church fathers. Crucially, these ancient languages also serve to preserve cultural identity, especially for diaspora communities. They anchor the faithful to their spiritual heritage amid modernity and migration. In lands where persecution or colonization threatened to erase native expressions of the faith, these liturgical tongues stood as a resilient witness. Thus, while Roman Catholicism has moved toward accessibility through vernacular use, Eastern Catholicism has leaned into continuity through the sacred preservation of ancient languages. Each approach reveals a deep pastoral and theological logic, balancing the need for understanding with the reverence owed to mystery. Ultimately, the language of worship in both traditions points to the Church's incarnational nature. God speaks through human words, and in every culture, the eternal Word becomes flesh anew. 8. Calendar and feasts, Gregorian versus Julian reckoning. Time is sacred in the life of the Church, not just in how it's lived, but in how it's marked. The liturgical calendar governs the rhythm of prayer, fasting, and celebration. Yet, one of the most visible and quietly profound differences between Roman Catholicism and Eastern Catholicism lies in how they measure this time, through distinct calendars that occasionally set them apart in celebrating the very same holy days. The Roman Catholic Church follows the Gregorian calendar, introduced by Pope Gregory XIII in 1582. This reform corrected the drift of the earlier Julian calendar, which had miscalculated the solar year by about 11 minutes. Over centuries, that small error led to significant discrepancies in the timing of Easter and the equinox. The Gregorian reform realigned the calendar with the seasons and the timing of ancient church feasts. Most of the Western world adopted this calendar over time. However, many Eastern Catholic churches, particularly those maintaining closer ties to their Orthodox roots, continue to observe the Julian calendar, or a revised version of it, especially when it comes to major feast days like Easter, Pascha, Christmas, and the Feast of Theophany. This calendar difference leads to fascinating liturgical divergences. For example, Roman Catholics may celebrate Easter in March, while Eastern Catholics may celebrate Pascha in April, often on a completely different Sunday. Christmas may fall on December 25th for Romans, but January 7th for some Eastern Catholics who follow the Julian reckoning. Feasts of saints and Marian solemnities can also vary in date. But this is far more than a matter of numbers on a calendar. It speaks to ecclesial identity, cultural memory, and liturgical unity. For Eastern Catholics, retaining the Julian calendar is a way of honoring their patrimony and maintaining solidarity with Orthodox counterparts, especially in regions where Eastern Catholicism developed through communion with Rome after centuries of shared Orthodox tradition. At the same time, these differences have led to pastoral tensions. In mixed communities or global diasporas, faithful may find themselves celebrating Easter or Christmas at different times, even within the same extended family. Bishops and theologians continue to engage in ecumenical dialogue, seeking possible solutions for a common Paschal date, a dream shared by many who long for Christian unity. Yet, for now, the diversity in calendars underscores the Catholic Church's true universality. Unity does not mean uniformity. The Roman and Eastern Catholic Churches, though distinct in timekeeping, still proclaim the same risen Christ. The Gregorian calendar offers order and universality, while the Julian calendar preserves continuity and tradition. In the tension between these two sacred rhythms, the Church is reminded that God sanctifies all time, and that whether east or west, all believers await the dawn of the eternal feast where calendars will finally converge, forever. 9. Church architecture and worship spaces. The architecture of a church is not simply a backdrop to the liturgy, it is itself a silent liturgy, a theological expression in stone, wood, light, and icon. One of the most striking differences between Roman Catholicism and Eastern Catholicism lies in the way they construct and utilize worship spaces, revealing profound spiritual and theological emphases embedded in their respective traditions. In Roman Catholic churches, especially those built or renovated after the Second Vatican Council, architecture tends to emphasize accessibility, clarity, and community participation. The nave, where the congregation sits, and the sanctuary, where the altar and clergy are located, are often separated by minimal architectural elements. Altar rails have been largely removed, and sightlines are clear and open. The focus is on horizontal unity, the gathered faithful surrounding the altar in a spirit of communal worship. Decoration is often more restrained, favoring statues, stained glass, and liturgical banners. The aesthetic evokes simplicity and clarity, emphasizing the tangible presence of Christ in the Eucharist, the intelligibility of the Word, and active lay participation. This spatial openness supports the Roman emphasis on rational comprehension and catechetical engagement in worship. In contrast, Eastern Catholic churches, in keeping with their Orthodox heritage, are designed to evoke heaven on earth. The most distinctive architectural feature is the iconostasis, a screen or wall covered in icons that separates the sanctuary, Holy of Holies, from the nave. This isn't a barrier but a threshold, symbolizing the mystery of God's presence while inviting reverent contemplation. The sanctuary is seen as the dwelling of divine glory, entered only by the clergy, while the faithful are drawn upward in awe. The use of gold, incense, candles, and iconography throughout the space immerses the worshipper in mystical symbolism. Icons are not decorative, they are theological windows, making present the saints and the divine mysteries they depict. The very architecture teaches, the liturgy is not a gathering of people, but a participation in the eternal heavenly liturgy. In the divine liturgy, the Eastern faithful often stand, chant continuously, and engage bodily with signs of reverence, enveloped by the sacred environment. The experience is profoundly vertical, a spiritual ascent, echoing the words of the liturgy, "Let us set aside all earthly cares that we may receive the King of all." Ultimately, these architectural distinctions are not merely cultural preferences, they are sacramental expressions of theology. The Roman Church draws attention to Christ in the midst of his people, emphasizing accessibility and instruction. The Eastern Church emphasizes Christ enthroned in glory, inviting awe, reverence, and mystery. Both traditions, however, shape sacred space with a singular goal, to lift hearts to God. Whether through the open clarity of the Roman Basilica or the golden mystery of the Eastern Temple, the Church, in all her beauty, seeks to become a dwelling place for the divine. 10. cultural identity and historical memory. At the heart of the Catholic Church's universality lies a profound paradox, a unity that allows for striking cultural and historical diversity. This is nowhere more evident than in the relationship between Roman Catholicism and Eastern Catholicism, especially in how each tradition navigates the tension between universal identity and local expression. Roman Catholicism, by its very nature, centers around the See of Rome, the papacy, and a broad vision of global unity. Its liturgical calendar, canon law, and ecclesial structures are designed to create a cohesive body of believers across continents and cultures. This universality has enabled the Roman Church to adapt and expand globally, from Latin America to Africa, Asia to North America, often incorporating local customs but always within a Roman framework. The Latin Church offers a kind of spiritual lingua franca, a common identity that transcends borders. In contrast, Eastern Catholic churches hold fast to ethnic, cultural, and historical roots that are not just ornamental but essential to their identity. Whether it's the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, the Maronite Church of Lebanon, the Melkite Church, or the Chaldean Church of Iraq, each tradition bears the marks of centuries of liturgical, theological, and political struggle, often under Ottoman, Islamic, or communist regimes. These churches did not become Catholic by accident or colonial imposition. Many chose communion with Rome during pivotal historical moments, some in the wake of schisms, others in pursuit of spiritual unity. But with that choice came tension, persecution, and even martyrdom. To be an Eastern Catholic is to carry a double legacy, Orthodox in expression, yet Catholic in allegiance. Their icons, vestments, languages, and fasts are reminders of a world that never surrendered to homogenization. And yet, their communion with Rome is not second class. It is a testimony to the Church's capacity for plurality, for honoring distinct identities while maintaining doctrinal unity. Their voices remind the wider Church that true Catholicity is not uniformity, but a symphony of voices singing the same eternal truth in different keys. Unity in diversity, the living mystery of the Church. As we close this reverent journey into the top 10 differences between Roman Catholicism and Eastern Catholicism, we discover something richer than contrast. We uncover the tapestry of unity in diversity. The Latin West and the Eastern Catholic Churches may differ in liturgy, theology, governance, imagery, and memory, but they profess the same creed, receive the same Eucharist, and serve the same Lord. Far from being signs of division, these distinctions embody the living mystery of the Church, a body with many members, each part glorifying God in its own sacred way. In an age tempted by division or indifferent sameness, the Catholic Church stands as a witness to a unity that holds tension, honors difference, and proclaims the gospel across languages, customs, and continents. These two lungs of the Church, East and West, may breathe differently, but they breathe together. And it is in that breath, imperfect yet divine, that the Church continues to live, teach, and sanctify. Subscribe now to explore more of the deep, rich, and dramatic stories shaping Christianity today. From the hidden martyrs of the East to the halls of the Vatican, the Church's story is still unfolding, and you're invited to witness it.